The search for two missing children in Nova Scotia is now in its third week.
6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack have been missing for a month now.
Todd, Lily Sullivan and her younger brother Jess seen in May, and since then investigators say they've chased down every lead.
The disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, two young siblings who vanished from their Canadian home in May 2025, remains one of the most shocking and mysterious missing children cases in Canada. What happened to them? Why couldn't even the elite RCMP K9 dogs find a trail? And was this really just two children wandering off, or a planned abduction? In this video, we begin to unravel the chilling truth. It was a crisp, quiet morning in the remote woodlands of British Columbia. The kind of morning where the mist clings to the trees and every sound seems louder than usual. But at precisely 8:12 a.m., a frantic 911 call shattered the stillness. On the line was Malaya Brooks Murray, the mother of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, reporting her children missing from their home at the edge of the forest. "They're gone! They're just gone!" she cried. Dispatchers noted her voice was panicked, but also strangely composed at times. She claimed she'd turned her back only for a few minutes, and when she returned to the yard, Lilly and Jack were nowhere to be found. Within 30 minutes, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived. The RCMP knew time was critical. The first 3 hours in a missing children case are the most important. They immediately launched a full-scale search. Volunteers from nearby towns poured in. Helicopters and drones were deployed. But all eyes were on the RCMP K9 dogs, the pride of the force. These K9 units are more than just police dogs. They are elite trackers, trained to pick up the faintest scent, follow it through wind, rain, even snow. In past missing children cases, these RCMP K9 dogs had found kids buried under rubble, hiding in caves, even wandering miles from home. Everyone assumed they'd quickly solve this disappearance too. Handlers brought out two German shepherds, Rex and Shadow. Both had impressive records, and both were eager, barking and straining at their leashes as the handlers approached the children's home. The family provided a jacket and a pair of shoes belonging to Lilly and Jack as scent articles. The dogs sniffed deeply, their ears perking up, tails stiff with focus. Then they were released into the yard, and the world held its breath. At first, everything went as expected. Rex picked up a scent trail almost immediately, pulling his handler toward the tree line. Shadow followed a parallel path, a few meters apart, moving quickly into the forest underbrush. The RCMP officers nodded to each other. This was going to be over soon, or so they thought. But less than 50 meters into the woods, Rex stopped. His head swung side to side, tail lowering. He began to circle, sniffing the ground, his movements growing more and more erratic. Shadow also slowed, then froze, whining softly. Both dogs returned to the same spot over and over, but they wouldn't or couldn't go any farther. The trail was gone. The RCMP handlers exchanged worried glances. They tried again, bringing the dogs back to the yard, resetting them with the scent articles, and releasing them once more. And once more, they bolted forward, only to stop at the exact same spot, lost and confused. One volunteer murmured under his breath, "That's not right. Dogs don't lie." The RCMP K9 dogs failing to find a trail was the first major red flag in the Lilly and Jack Sullivan disappearance. In almost every Canadian missing children case, the dogs at least point investigators in the right direction, even if the children aren't found alive. But here, the trail ended as if the two young siblings had simply vanished into thin air. And so, by noon, whispers started spreading through the crowd of volunteers and neighbors. Could two children that young really have wandered off so far and left no trace? Or was this something else? Could someone have taken them, carried them away, perhaps even driven off, leaving nothing behind for the K9s to find? The mother, Malaya Brooks Murray, sat on the porch, her face pale but dry-eyed, occasionally glancing at her phone. The stepfather, Daniel Martell, was less reserved, pacing back and forth, snapping at officers who got too close to the house. Many couldn't help but notice how quickly suspicion began to cloud the air, not just over the forest, but over the home itself. As the sun climbed higher, the RCMP called in additional K-9 teams, hoping fresh dogs might have better luck. But the result was the same. The scent trails started, then stopped. Some officers began to quietly theorize that the children might never have left the yard on their own at all. By the end of the first day, the official line from RCMP was simple. "We are treating this as a missing children investigation. All possibilities remain on the table." But unofficially, many in the search teams already suspected the obvious. Something about this disappearance, and the silence of the trail, didn't add up. Coming up in part 2 of our investigation into the Lilly and Jack Sullivan disappearance, we take a closer look at the dogs themselves, how RCMP K-9 searches work in missing children cases, and why experts say the trail ending so abruptly suggests something far darker than a simple case of 2 children wandering off. Stay with us, here on True Child Cases. Part 2, the dogs are released. In most missing children investigations in Canada, the RCMP's K-9 dogs are the heroes. Their noses have found fugitives hiding in swamps, hikers lost in the snow, even toddlers buried under rubble. But in the Lilly and Jack Sullivan disappearance, even the K-9s came up empty. Why? The sun was still rising as the first RCMP K-9 unit arrived at the Sullivan property. The air was cool, heavy with dew, perfect conditions for scent tracking. Veteran handler Sergeant Paul Ingram knelt beside his partner, Rex, giving the German Shepherd a reassuring pat. Rex was already eager, whining softly, tail stiff. This was what he lived for. Next to him, Corporal Jenna Fraser readied Shadow, a sleek black shepherd with a reputation for precision. Together, these dogs had solved dozens of Canadian missing children cases. Everyone expected them to solve this one too. But what no one expected was what came next. "Find," Ingram commanded, lowering Lily's pink jacket to Rex's nose. The dog sniffed deeply, then barked once, lunging toward the woods. Shadow followed, tracking a parallel line a few feet away. For about 50 meters, the dogs pulled hard, their handlers jogging to keep up. Everyone watching let out a collective breath of relief. The trail was fresh, strong. This was how RCMP 9 dogs worked. Once they locked in on a missing child's scent, they didn't stop until they found them. But just as suddenly as it started, it ended. Rex froze. His head dropped low, ears back. He sniffed the ground, then began circling, confused. Shadow also stopped, pawing at the dirt, whining. Both dogs returned to the same small patch of earth again and again, tails drooping. It was as if the trail had simply vanished. Ingram tried again, leading Rex back to the yard, resetting him with the scent jacket. Once more, Rex surged ahead, only to stop in the same exact place. Shadow did the same. This wasn't just unusual, it was alarming. According to Sergeant Ingram, when 2 different RCMP K-9 dogs lose a trail at the exact same spot, you start to ask questions. That doesn't happen unless there's nothing left to follow. Why would there be nothing left? Did the children climb into a car? Were they carried off? Or was this scene staged to look like they had wandered off into the woods? We spoke to retired RCMP K-9 trainer Mark Edwards, who said the same thing. These dogs can follow the tiniest biological traces. Even if a kid wanders for hours, leaves clothing fibers, sweat, disturbed soil, they pick it up. For 2 young children to leave 0 trackable scent beyond 50 meters, either they didn't walk that far, or someone carried them away. Those are the only 2 scenarios that make sense. It wasn't just the canines noticing strange things that day. Volunteers working the tree line reported the ground was undisturbed, no broken twigs, no obvious child-sized footprints in the mud beyond where the dogs stopped. There were no signs of panic or struggle, and yet no signs of children simply playing and wandering either. One searcher remarked, "You'd expect to see something, a sock, a toy, a drag mark, anything. But here, nothing. Just nothing." And so, by the afternoon of May 3rd, 2025, doubt began to seep into the investigation. Could two children that young, in their pajamas, really have wandered into the forest without leaving a trace? Or was the truth far more sinister? The RCMP kept their statements measured, refusing to speculate publicly. All possibilities remain under investigation, they said. But internally, according to one officer who spoke anonymously, suspicion was already falling closer to home. Because if the children hadn't left on their own, who had moved them? And why? The RCMP K9 dogs were given one more chance. Later that evening, just before dusk, a third dog, Titan, was brought in from a neighboring detachment. Titan was younger but highly skilled. His handler repeated the same process: scent article, command, release, and just like Rex and Shadow, Titan found the trail, followed it to the same place, and then stopped cold. 3 dogs, 3 failures, and one big question left hanging in the air. How could the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan leave no trail for even the best RCMP K9 dogs to follow? Coming up in part 3 of our investigation, we delve deeper into why RCMP K9 searches rarely fail, and what this failure might mean for the official narrative of the Lilly and Jack Sullivan disappearance. We'll also examine expert theories about whether the children wandered off or were abducted. Stay with us here on True Child Cases as we continue to uncover the chilling truth behind one of Canada's most mysterious missing children cases. Part 3. Questions in the Woods. By the end of the first day, the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan had already become one of the most puzzling missing children cases in Canada. The RCMP's elite K9 dogs had searched the woods repeatedly and come up empty. And as the hours ticked by, new questions emerged about the trail that wasn't there and what really happened in those woods. RCMP spokespersons continued to tell reporters the children may have simply wandered off. It was the official line. After all, it's what happens in most Canadian missing children cases. Kids stray, lose their way, and panic. But the facts of this case didn't seem to fit. The Sullivan property sat on the edge of dense forest. The house itself was old but sturdy, with a small yard leading into a wall of tall pines and uneven terrain. Volunteers and officers noted the ground beyond the yard was damp, but not muddy, carpeted with pine needles. There had been no rain for days, ideal conditions for tracking footprints or scents. Yet nothing was found beyond the 50-meter point where the K9 dogs lost the trail. One RCMP officer privately told True Child Cases, "We've worked dozens of missing children investigations. Even when kids are carried, you usually find something. A shoe falls off. A scent lingers. Something. But here? Nothing. It's like they were never here." To understand why the dogs struggled, we spoke to K9 trainer and forensic tracker Michelle Doran, who's consulted on dozens of RCMP missing children cases across Canada. "People think dogs are infallible," she began. "They're not, but they're incredibly good at what they do. Wind, rain, snow, those can complicate things. But on a dry, cool morning, with 2 kids moving through brush, there's no reason they shouldn't have been able to track further unless something unusual happened." When pressed to explain unusual, Doran outlined several possibilities. Someone carried the children in a way that minimized their contact with the ground. The children were immediately loaded into a vehicle waiting nearby. Or, in rare cases, the trail was contaminated before the dogs could properly pick it up. But even then, she said, you'd expect them to find something. Local volunteer searchers began noticing other oddities too. One man pointed out that the children's swing set in the yard still had 2 small cups of juice resting on its platform, untouched. Another found a toy dinosaur in the grass, right where the mother said she'd last seen them playing. No signs of struggle, no footprints running into the woods, just silence. And that silence began to weigh on everyone. Even among the RCMP officers, whispers started to circulate about the stepfather, Daniel Martell. His behavior during the search had struck many as strange, pacing the porch, glaring at officers, barking at anyone who came near the house. His criminal record, which included minor drug charges and a history of domestic disputes, quickly came to light among the locals. But despite mounting suspicion, the RCMP kept their focus on the woods, at least publicly. Over the next 48 hours, search teams expanded their grid, bringing in more RCMP K9 dogs from neighboring detachments. But each time the result was the same. The dogs tracked for a few dozen meters, then stopped, and the forest itself only added to the unease. The deeper you went, the darker it became. The uneven terrain, with its sudden drops and dense undergrowth, seemed unlikely, even dangerous, for 2 small children to have navigated on their own. One veteran search and rescue volunteer summed it up bluntly. If they went in there alone, we would have at least found a body by now. As the days passed, frustration grew. Journalists began asking harder questions at press briefings. Why weren't there any footprints? Why didn't the RCMP K9 dogs pick up a longer trail? Why were there no clothing fibers, no signs of panic? And why hadn't the mother and stepfather been asked to sit for longer interrogations? The RCMP's answer was always the same. All possibilities remain under investigation. But for many watching, and for those in the woods that day, the possibility that Lilly and Jack Sullivan had simply wandered off was becoming harder and harder to believe. Coming up in part 4 of our investigation, Wandered or Taken. We examine how the evidence, or lack thereof, points more and more to an abduction, and why some experts believe the trail ending so abruptly suggests someone close to the family may know more than they've said. Stay with us here on True Child Cases as we continue to uncover the chilling truth behind one of Canada's most mysterious missing children cases. Part 4, Wandered or Taken. As the search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan stretched into its 3rd day, the question at the center of Canada's most mysterious missing children case became impossible to ignore. Did the 2 young siblings really just wander off into the forest, or were they taken? And if so, by whom? On paper, the idea that the children had simply gotten lost made sense. Young children do wander. In fact, most Canadian missing children cases begin exactly that way. The RCMP pointed out that the Sullivan property backed directly onto miles of dense woodland. To some, it seemed plausible. But as more details emerged, that theory began to fall apart. First, there were the K9 dogs. In every Canadian missing children investigation over the past decade, RCMP K9 units had successfully tracked missing kids at least part way, even in bad weather. Here, conditions had been perfect, cool, dry, with no rain to wash away scent. Yet, as we've already seen, the K9s picked up the trail for only 50 meters before losing it completely. For experts, that fact alone made the wandered-off theory harder to believe. Second, there was the terrain. Veteran search and rescue volunteer Claire Murray explained. That area isn't flat parkland. It's full of undergrowth, roots, gullies. Kids don't just stroll through it like nothing. They trip, they fall, they leave broken branches, torn clothes, but there was nothing, not even a scuff mark past where the dog stopped. The possibility of abduction became more and more likely, but if it was an abduction, how and by whom? There were no tire tracks near the road. No witnesses saw a vehicle speeding away, and yet, that's exactly what many experts began to suspect. Forensic psychologist Dr. Henry Walsh, who has studied dozens of child abduction cases across Canada, weighed in. When two young children go missing simultaneously, and there's no physical evidence of them leaving on their own, it's almost always the result of intervention by another party. Either they were carried or placed in a vehicle. Children that young don't coordinate a disappearance themselves. The family's statements also began to come under scrutiny. The mother, Malaya Brooks Murray, told reporters she'd stepped inside for just a moment to take a phone call, but phone records showed the call lasted over 7 minutes. The stepfather, Daniel Martell, claimed he was in the garage the entire time, but volunteers reported seeing him outside pacing just minutes after the children were last seen. DJ. Journalists covering the story noticed how defensive Daniel became when asked about that morning. At one press conference, when a reporter questioned him about the timeline, he snapped, "I already told you what happened. Why are you asking me again, DJ?" Forensic linguists analyzing their statements pointed out inconsistencies and possible signs of deception, like Malaya repeatedly referring to her children in the past tense during interviews, and Daniel shifting from "I didn't see them leave" to "we didn't see them leave." Small details, but enough to raise eyebrows. DJ. The RCMP continued to officially state that all possibilities remain open, but off the record, one officer told True Child Cases, "We're not saying they didn't wander off, but we're also not saying they did. What we are saying is, nothing about this feels right." The psychological aspect of the case also added weight to the abduction theory. Young children, especially siblings, rarely wander far. Professor Ellen Sharp, an expert in child behavior in crisis, explained, "Children that young usually stay close to familiar environments. Even if scared, they tend to hunker down nearby, not run deep into dangerous terrain." The fact that both disappeared together and without leaving a trail suggests an outside force was involved. As public suspicion turned toward the family, the RCMP began to quietly dig deeper into their history. Court records showed Malaya had once filed a restraining order against Daniel during a rocky period in their relationship, citing erratic behavior and verbal threats. The order had since been dropped, but the history was there. Neighbors also described heated arguments between the two, sometimes late at night, with doors slamming and shouting audible from the street. By the end of the first week, the RCMP had questioned both Malaya and Daniel multiple times, though neither was officially named a suspect. Both continued to insist the children had simply wandered off, pleading with the public for help finding them. But behind the scenes, investigators grew increasingly skeptical, and still, the forest held its silence. No bodies, no clothing, no footprints, nothing beyond that 50-meter point. One anonymous volunteer summed up the growing frustration. "We've scoured these woods for days. If they were here, we'd have found something by now, but there's nothing. It feels like we're chasing ghosts." Coming up in part 5 of our investigation, Silence of the Trail. We look at what happened in the days and weeks after the disappearance, how the RCMP shifted its focus, and why some believe the truth about what really happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan is still hidden in plain sight. Stay tuned to True Child Cases as we bring you the final chapter of this chilling Canadian true crime story. Part 5. Silence of the Trail. The disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan has become one of Canada's most chilling, unsolved missing children cases. Even weeks later, the silence of the trail, and the silence from those closest to them, continues to raise disturbing questions. What really happened to these children? And why hasn't the truth come to light? As the days turned into weeks, the RCMP quietly shifted its strategy. The initial search effort in the forest was scaled back. Fewer volunteers were called in. Fewer K9 dogs were deployed. The narrative, publicly at least, remained the same. We continue to search for two children who are presumed missing. But internally, investigators were no longer convinced they were searching in the right place. One officer, speaking off the record, admitted, "We're no longer certain the forest is where this started, or where it ended. The dogs told us that much on day one." For many in the community, suspicion had already shifted firmly onto the family. Neighbors began to share stories with reporters, stories of loud arguments, of doors slamming, of the children crying late into the night. One neighbor even claimed to have seen Daniel loading large trash bags into his truck the evening before the disappearance, though that account has never been confirmed. Malaya and Daniel maintained their innocence, appearing in front of cameras to plead for the children's safe return. But their performances drew mixed reactions. Some felt sorry for them, believing they were grieving parents. Others noted how rehearsed their statements sounded, how Daniel sometimes smirked at odd moments, how Malaya's eyes stayed dry even as she begged for help. True crime experts analyzing their behavior called it classic leakiness, subtle tells that something wasn't right beneath the surface. Even as they insisted the children had simply wandered off, they seemed detached, as though they knew something the rest of the world didn't. The RCMP eventually brought in forensic teams to scour the house and yard. Cadaver dogs were briefly deployed, though no findings were publicly announced. Forensic luminol tests reportedly revealed trace amounts of blood in the garage, but officials claimed it was inconclusive. That single word, inconclusive, became a grim metaphor for the entire case. Meanwhile, public opinion became deeply divided. Some in the small town rallied around the family, putting up posters, holding candlelight vigils, and praying for the safe return of Lilly and Jack. Others avoided the couple entirely, refusing to speak to them, crossing the street when they passed. The case attracted national attention, with headlines like, "Canadian children vanish without a trace," "RCMP canine dogs fail to find missing siblings," and "Abduction or Accident: The Mystery of Lilly and Jack Sullivan." True crime forums across Canada and beyond lit up with theories. Were the children victims of a stranger abduction? Or was this a family secret gone terribly wrong? For the RCMP, it became clear that without new evidence, the case could stall indefinitely. As weeks became months, leads dried up. Tips trickled in, but none led to credible suspects. The canine dogs were brought back one final time months later after a hiker claimed to have seen small clothing in the forest. The dog searched again, and again found nothing. One handler shaking his head was overheard muttering, "Dogs don't lie. If there was something to find, we'd have found it." That silence, the silence of the trail, the silence of the evidence, the silence of the children themselves, remains the most haunting part of this Canadian missing children investigation. It leaves everyone who's worked on the case asking the same question: what really happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan? And so, the case remains open, but unsolved. The file sits on a shelf labeled active, though few truly believe new answers are coming anytime soon. But someone, somewhere, knows the truth. And if that truth is ever to come out, it will come not from the silence of the woods, nor the silence of the trail, but from the silence of those who have stayed quiet for too long. This has been our investigation into the mysterious disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, one of Canada's most chilling true crime cases. Was it a tragic accident, or a calculated abduction, or something even darker? Tell us what you think happened. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget, subscribe to True Child Cases for more in-depth true crime investigations like this one. Share this video so that the story of Lilly and Jack Sullivan is never forgotten. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and stay vigilant.